The autumn wind howled through the industrial district of Millfield, Indiana, carrying the acrid smell of factory smoke and the promise of an early winter. It was October 15th, 1992, and the third shift at Millfield Automotive Parts was settling into their nightly routine. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the main production area, casting harsh shadows across the maze of conveyor belts and stamping machines that had been running nearly non-stop since 1967. Danny Morales wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted his safety goggles. At 43, he'd been working the night shift for over a decade, and the rhythmic pounding of the hydraulic presses had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. The factory produced brake components for General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, essential parts that kept America's cars stopping safely on highways from coast to coast. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well enough to support his wife and 3 kids, and in the economically struggling Midwest of the early 1990s, that counted for everything. Beside him, Marcus Thompson was already pulling on his thick work gloves, the leather worn smooth from years of handling hot metal parts. At 31, Marcus had recently been promoted to night shift supervisor, making him the youngest person ever to hold that position at Millfield. His promotion hadn't come without controversy. Some of the older workers resented taking orders from someone they'd watched grow up in town. But Marcus had earned their respect through his quick thinking and steady nerves during the plant's numerous small crises. "You see Rebecca's car in the lot when you came in?" Danny asked, nodding toward the employee parking area visible through the grime-covered windows. "That old Ford Escort of hers has been giving her trouble again." Before I continue with this incredible true story that shocked a small Indiana town, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps us bring you more of these mysterious cases that have haunted American communities for decades. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Your engagement means the world to us. Now, back to that fateful October night in 1992. Marcus shook his head, checking the industrial clock mounted high on the factory wall. "She's running late again. Probably had trouble getting Kevin situated with Mrs. Patterson." Rebecca Hartwell was their quality control inspector, a single mother of 6-year-old Kevin who had been working nights for almost 2 years. Her husband had been killed in a car accident in 1989, leaving her to navigate widowhood and single parenthood while trying to maintain the middle-class life they'd built together in their small ranch house on Maple Street. The night shift at Millfield ran with exactly 11 people, a skeleton crew that handled the overflow orders that kept the company competitive against cheaper overseas manufacturers. Rebecca's job was crucial. She inspected every 10th part coming off the line, catching defects that could result in catastrophic brake failures if they made it into actual vehicles. Her attention to detail was legendary among her co-workers, and she took pride in the fact that not a single recalled part had passed her inspection station in nearly 2 years of work. By 12:45 a.m., Rebecca still hadn't appeared. The production line was running behind schedule without her quality checks, and Marcus was growing increasingly concerned. Danny tried calling her home number from the supervisor's office, letting the rotary phone ring 20 times before hanging up in frustration. The sound echoed hollowly in the small, cluttered office that smelled of cigarette smoke and instant coffee. "This isn't right," Danny told Marcus, genuine worry creeping into his voice. "Rebecca's never missed a shift without calling. Never. She can't afford to miss work, and she knows we can't run the line properly without quality control." Marcus pulled out the employee contact sheet, his finger tracing down to Rebecca's emergency information. "Says here to call her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, in case we can't reach her directly." Eleanor Patterson was an elderly widow who lived next door to Rebecca and often watched Kevin when Rebecca worked nights. She'd become like a grandmother to the boy, filling some of the void left by his father's death. When they called, Mrs. Patterson's voice was thick with sleep and confusion. "Rebecca?" "No, dear, I haven't seen her since yesterday afternoon when she dropped Kevin off at my house before she went grocery shopping. The boy's still here, sleeping in my spare room. Is something wrong? Has something happened?" The question hit both men like ice water. If Rebecca wasn't at work and Kevin was still with Mrs. Patterson from the previous day, where was she? What had happened between grocery shopping yesterday afternoon and her scheduled shift tonight? Marcus made the decision to call the police at 1:20 a.m. after they'd exhausted every logical explanation they could think of. Millfield was small enough that the overnight dispatcher recognized Marcus's name when he called. "Thompson, isn't your daddy the one who ran the hardware store?" she asked before taking down the details of Rebecca's absence. Officer Janet Pierce arrived at the factory 45 minutes later, her squad car's headlights cutting through the October darkness as she navigated between the employee vehicles in the parking lot. Pierce was 34 years old, a transplant from Indianapolis who had moved to Millfield 3 years earlier after her marriage fell apart. She'd wanted a quieter life, but she'd learned that small towns had their own complexities, their own secrets, and their own tragedies. "You said she's never missed work without calling?" Pierce asked, her notebook balanced against the hood of her police cruiser. Danny and Marcus stood in the cold night air, their work uniforms offering little protection against the October chill. Around them, the factory hummed with activity, but the mood among the night shift workers had grown somber as word of Rebecca's absence spread. "Never," Danny emphasized, his breath visible in small puffs. "Rebecca's got a mortgage to pay, you understand? Her husband's life insurance helped, but it's not enough to live on forever. She needs this job. Plus, she's got that little boy to think about. Kevin's only 6, and he's already lost his father. She wouldn't just disappear on him." Pierce drove to Rebecca's house on Maple Street, a modest neighborhood of ranch-style homes built in the 1960s when Millfield's economy was booming. The houses were small but well-maintained, representing the American dream scaled down to fit working-class budgets. Rebecca's Ford Escort wasn't in the driveway, and the house was completely dark except for a single porch light that cast a yellow glow over the front steps. Mrs. Patterson emerged from her house next door, wrapped in a thick bathrobe and looking worried. She was 72 years old, a retired school teacher who had taught at Jefferson Elementary for 40 years before retiring. She knew every family in the neighborhood and had watched Kevin grow from a toddler into a bright, curious first grader. "I've been keeping an eye on Rebecca's house," Mrs. Patterson told Officer Pierce. "Haven't seen any lights, haven't heard anything unusual. Her car's been gone since yesterday afternoon. I just assumed she was running errands after work, or maybe visiting her sister up in Fort Wayne." Pierce walked around the house, checking windows and doors with her flashlight. Everything appeared normal. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. The house was locked up tight, just as Rebecca would have left it before going to work. But when Pierce peered through the kitchen window with her flashlight, something caught her attention. On the kitchen counter, clearly visible through the glass, were several grocery bags that appeared to be partially unpacked. Boxes of cereal and canned goods sat beside the bags, as if Rebecca had been interrupted while putting away her groceries. A carton of milk sat on the counter rather than being refrigerated, and flies buzzed around what appeared to be a package of hamburger meat that had been left out. "Mrs. Patterson," Pierce called to the elderly woman, "when exactly did you last see Rebecca yesterday?" "Oh, it was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon," Mrs. Patterson replied, pulling her robe tighter against the cold. "She came to pick up Kevin from my house. I'd been watching him while she was at work Tuesday night, you see. She mentioned she needed to stop at the grocery store before her shift Wednesday night, said she was making Kevin's favorite dinner tonight, spaghetti and meatballs." Pierce felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. If Rebecca had been grocery shopping Wednesday afternoon and her shift started at 11 p.m., what had happened during those crucial hours? Where had she gone after leaving the store? The investigation expanded rapidly over the next 24 hours. Pierce contacted the Millfield IGA, where Rebecca typically shopped, and the manager confirmed that Rebecca had been there Wednesday afternoon around 4:30 p.m. Security cameras showed her selecting items, paying with cash, and loading 2 bags into her Ford Escort. She appeared normal, unhurried, giving no indication that anything was wrong. But the trail went cold after that. Rebecca's car was discovered Thursday evening in the parking lot of a rest area on State Route 37, about 30 miles south of Millfield. The keys were still in the ignition, her purse was on the passenger seat with her wallet intact, and the grocery bags were still in the back seat, their contents now spoiled and attracting insects. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no evidence of foul play. The Indiana State Police took over the investigation, treating it as a potential abduction case. Detective Robert Martinez, a 20-year veteran with experience in missing persons cases, arrived from Indianapolis to coordinate the search efforts. Martinez was known for his methodical approach and his ability to see patterns that other investigators missed. "Something about this doesn't feel random," Martinez told Officer Pierce as they examined Rebecca's abandoned car. "The location where the car was found, it's isolated but not completely remote. Whoever left it here wanted it to be found eventually, but not immediately. That suggests planning, not impulse." The rest area where Rebecca's car was discovered was a lonely spot along a stretch of highway that connected several small Indiana towns. It consisted of a few picnic tables, a small building housing restrooms, and a large gravel parking area surrounded by dense woods. During the day, it might see a dozen visitors. At night, it was often completely deserted. Martinez organized search teams to comb through the woods surrounding the rest area, looking for any clue that might indicate what had happened to Rebecca. Volunteers from Millfield joined the effort, including her co-workers from the factory, neighbors from Maple Street, and parents from Kevin's school. The searches continued for weeks, covering an ever-widening radius around the rest area, but they found nothing. Rebecca's sister, Patricia, drove down from Fort Wayne to help with the investigation and to care for Kevin. Patricia was 3 years older than Rebecca and worked as a nurse at a Fort Wayne hospital. She had never married and had devoted herself to her career, but she immediately stepped up to provide stability for her nephew during this traumatic time. Rebecca would never just leave Kevin, Patricia insisted during her interview with Detective Martinez. Never. That boy is everything to her. After David died in the car accident, Kevin became her whole world. She was working nights specifically so she could be home with him during the day. Someone took her. Someone hurt her. The case attracted media attention throughout Indiana, with Rebecca's photograph appearing in newspapers from Indianapolis to Evansville. The story had all the elements that captured public interest. A young widow trying to make it on her own, a motherless child, and a mysterious disappearance that defied explanation. Tips poured in from across the Midwest, but none led to any concrete evidence about Rebecca's fate. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to slow down. Detective Martinez followed every lead, no matter how unlikely, but the trail remained cold. The FBI was consulted, but found no evidence suggesting that Rebecca had been taken across state lines, limiting their involvement. Without a body, without witnesses, and without any clear motive, the case gradually faded from public attention. Kevin went to live permanently with his Aunt Patricia in Fort Wayne, leaving behind the only home he'd ever known. The transition was difficult for a 6-year-old who had already lost his father and now faced the reality that his mother might never come home. Patricia enrolled him in counseling and did everything she could to provide stability, but Kevin often asked when his mother was coming back, a question that broke Patricia's heart every time. The workers at Millfield Automotive Parts held a small memorial service for Rebecca in December 1992, collecting money for Kevin's future education. A scholarship fund was established in Rebecca's name at Jefferson Elementary, providing assistance to children who had lost parents. The factory installed better lighting in the employee parking lot and implemented a buddy system requiring night shift workers to walk to their cars in pairs. Danny Morales couldn't let go of the case. Every few months, he would take personal time from work and drive to different towns across Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio, showing Rebecca's photograph to clerks at gas stations, restaurants, and truck stops. He developed his own theory that Rebecca had witnessed something criminal and had been silenced to prevent her from talking to police. Marcus Thompson struggled with guilt, wondering if he should have acted sooner when Rebecca failed to show up for work. He transferred to the day shift after 6 months, unable to work the same hours without thinking about that October night. The factory brought in a new quality control inspector, but the older workers often commented that she wasn't as thorough as Rebecca had been. Years passed with no new developments. Detective Martinez retired in 1998, turning the case file over to younger officers who periodically reviewed it, but found nothing their predecessors had missed. Patricia raised Kevin as her own son, and he grew into a bright teenager who excelled in school but never stopped hoping for answers about what had happened to his mother. Officer Janet Pierce left the Millfield Police Department in 2000, taking a position with the Indiana State Police. The Rebecca Hartwell case had haunted her throughout her 8 years in Millfield, representing the one major investigation she'd never been able to solve. She kept copies of the case files in her personal records, occasionally reviewing them when new forensic techniques became available. By 2006, 14 years after Rebecca's disappearance, Millfield had changed significantly. The automotive parts factory had been sold twice, finally becoming part of a large international conglomerate. Many of the original workers had retired or moved away, and the new employees knew nothing about the woman who had vanished from the third shift so many years ago. Jerome Washington had been working as the night janitor at the factory since 1998, 6 years after Rebecca's disappearance. At 55, Jerome was a Vietnam veteran who had spent most of his adult life working blue-collar jobs across the Midwest. He took pride in his work, approaching the cleaning and maintenance of the factory with military precision and attention to detail. The factory's basement level was rarely visited during normal operations. Originally designed to house mechanical systems and provide storage space, it had become a repository for outdated equipment, obsolete inventory, and forgotten supplies. The basement stretched beneath the entire production floor, a maze of interconnected rooms and corridors that most employees never saw. On a humid August night in 2006, Jerome was conducting his monthly deep cleaning of the basement storage areas. This wasn't part of his regular routine, but he'd noticed water stains on the main floor ceiling that suggested a leak somewhere in the basement plumbing. He methodically checked each room, looking for signs of water damage or pipe leaks that might require repair. In a storage room at the far end of the basement, Jerome discovered something that initially seemed insignificant. Behind a large steel shelving unit filled with obsolete machine parts, he noticed that the concrete floor was uneven. What had appeared to be a smooth surface actually had a rectangular section that was slightly raised, as if something had been buried beneath the floor and the concrete had been re-poured over it. Jerome's military training had taught him to notice details that others might miss, and the uneven floor bothered him. He fetched a pry bar from his cleaning cart and carefully worked it around the edges of the raised section. To his surprise, the concrete lifted away easily, revealing that it wasn't a permanent part of the floor, but rather a carefully fitted cover. Beneath the false floor section was a rectangular cavity about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 18 inches deep. Inside the cavity, wrapped in heavy plastic, were items that made Jerome's blood run cold. A woman's purse, badly deteriorated but still recognizable. A child's lunchbox with cartoon characters on the side. And most chilling of all, a small plastic bag containing what appeared to be jewelry and identification cards. Jerome immediately called the police, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. The current police chief, David Rodriguez, Danny Morales' nephew, who had joined the force after college, arrived within minutes. Rodriguez was familiar with the Rebecca Hartwell case. It was one of the unsolved mysteries that older officers still discussed during quiet moments. By morning, the basement storage room was swarming with investigators. The Indiana State Police Crime Scene Unit carefully excavated the hidden compartment, documenting and photographing everything before removing it for analysis. FBI agents specializing in cold cases arrived from Indianapolis, recognizing that the discovery might finally provide answers to a 14-year-old mystery. The items found in the hidden compartment were confirmed to belong to Rebecca Hartwell. Her driver's license, credit cards, and work identification were all present and accounted for. The child's lunchbox belonged to Kevin. Patricia confirmed that it had been missing since the day Rebecca disappeared. Most significantly, forensic analysis of the plastic wrapping revealed fingerprints that didn't match Rebecca or Kevin. The discovery transformed the Rebecca Hartwell case from a missing person investigation into a homicide inquiry. FBI behavioral analysts were brought in to create a psychological profile of the perpetrator, someone who had not only killed Rebecca, but had access to the factory basement and the knowledge to create a sophisticated hiding place for evidence. Agent Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to Chief Rodriguez, led the FBI investigation. She was a specialist in cold cases, with particular expertise in workplace violence and crimes involving blue-collar environments. Her first step was to review the original investigation files and identify anyone who had worked at the factory in 1992 and had the access and opportunity to create the hidden compartment. The list of potential suspects was surprisingly short. The basement area was restricted to maintenance personnel and supervisors, and records showed that only 4 people had regular access in 1992. 2 of those individuals had died in the intervening years, leaving only 2 viable suspects: the plant's former maintenance supervisor and a contract electrician who had worked on site for several months. William Bill Kowalski had been the maintenance supervisor at Millfield Automotive Parts from 1985 to 1995, retiring early due to back problems. At 71, he was living in a nursing home in nearby Anderson, Indiana, suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease. When Agent Rodriguez interviewed him, it became clear that his mental condition made him an unlikely suspect. He couldn't remember his own children's names, let alone events from 14 years earlier. That left Carl Brennan, the contract electrician who had worked at the factory from September through December 1992. Brennan's work had involved upgrading the electrical systems throughout the plant, including extensive work in the basement areas. He would have had unrestricted access to the storage rooms and the technical knowledge to create the hidden compartment. Tracking down Brennan proved challenging. Employment records showed that he had worked for several different electrical contractors over the years, moving frequently and rarely staying in one place for more than a few months. By 2006, he was 62 years old and supposedly retired, but there was no current address on file with Social Security or the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Agent Rodriguez eventually located Brennan through his ex-wife, who lived in Terre Haute. According to her, Carl had always been a drifter, unable to maintain steady employment or relationships. They had divorced in 1995 after 15 years of marriage, and she hadn't spoken to him in over 5 years. Her last information suggested he was living somewhere in southern Illinois, possibly in the Carbondale area. Federal marshals found Brennan living in a rundown trailer park outside Carbondale, sharing a single-wide mobile home with another unemployed electrician. The trailer was filled with empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and the accumulated debris of someone who had given up on maintaining appearances. Brennan himself looked older than his 62 years, his face weathered by decades of alcohol abuse and outdoor work. When agents knocked on his trailer door on a rainy September morning, Carl Brennan's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale, and he began to stammer excuses before the agents had even identified themselves. "I don't know nothing about no missing woman," he said, even though they hadn't mentioned Rebecca's name or indicated why they were there. The interview with Brennan took place at the FBI field office in Springfield, Illinois. Agent Rodriguez had seen hundreds of suspect interviews during her career, and she recognized the signs of someone carrying a heavy secret. Brennan was nervous, evasive, and clearly struggling with whether to maintain his denials or admit to something that had been eating at him for 14 years. Confronted with the physical evidence found in the factory basement, Brennan's story began to unravel. He admitted to knowing Rebecca, claiming that he had asked her out several times during his work at the factory. According to Brennan, Rebecca had been polite but firm in declining his advances, explaining that she wasn't ready to date after her husband's death. "She was real nice about it," Brennan told investigators, his voice barely above a whisper. "Never made me feel like a creep or nothing. But I couldn't get her out of my head, you know. She was so pretty, and she seemed so lonely. I thought maybe if I just tried harder, showed her how much I cared." The truth, as it emerged over several hours of questioning, was far darker than Brennan's initial portrayal suggested. He had become obsessed with Rebecca, following her home from work, watching her house, and learning her daily routines. He knew that she shopped for groceries every Wednesday afternoon before her night shift, and he knew the route she typically took home. On October 15th, 1992, Brennan had been waiting in the parking lot of the Millfield IGA when Rebecca finished her shopping. He approached her as she was loading groceries into her Ford Escort, claiming that his own car had broken down and asking if she could give him a ride to a gas station. Rebecca, being kind-hearted and trusting, had agreed to help. Instead of directing her to a gas station, Brennan had guided Rebecca to an isolated area outside town, where he revealed his true intentions. He confessed his obsession with her and demanded that she agree to a romantic relationship with him. When Rebecca refused and tried to leave, Brennan became violent. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Brennan sobbed during his confession. "I just wanted her to listen, to understand how much I loved her, but she kept saying no, kept trying to get away. When I grabbed her arm, she fell and hit her head on a rock. There was so much blood." According to Brennan's account, Rebecca had died from the head injury within minutes of the assault. Panicked and realizing the enormity of what had happened, Brennan had disposed of Rebecca's body in a remote quarry pond about 40 miles from Millfield. He had then driven her car to the rest area on State Route 37, wiping down the surfaces and leaving it there to be discovered. But Brennan's most calculated act had been returning to the factory basement during his work shifts over the following weeks. Using his electrical work as cover, he had carefully excavated the hiding place beneath the storage room floor, creating a concrete cover that perfectly matched the surrounding surface. Rebecca's personal belongings had been hidden there, insurance against the possibility that her body might someday be found and traced back to him. The confession led investigators to the quarry pond, where Brennan claimed to have disposed of Rebecca's body. The location was now part of a state recreation area, and the pond had been enlarged and developed for fishing and boating. Underwater search teams spent weeks in the murky water, using sonar equipment and diving gear to explore the deepest sections where a weighted body might have settled. On October 15, 2006, Exactly 14 years after Rebecca's disappearance, divers recovered skeletal remains from the bottom of the quarry pond. Forensic examination confirmed that the remains belonged to Rebecca Hartwell, finally providing the physical evidence needed to close the case. The condition of the bones was consistent with Brennan's account of how she had died. Carl Brennan was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a plea agreement, receiving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing hearing, he offered a brief apology to Rebecca's family, but Patricia Hartwell refused to acknowledge him. 14 years, Patricia said outside the courthouse after Brennan was led away in shackles. 14 years of not knowing, of Kevin asking when his mother was coming home. At least now we have answers. At least now Rebecca can finally rest in peace. Kevin Hartwell, now 20 years old and a junior at Indiana University, attended the sentencing hearing. He had grown into a thoughtful young man who was studying criminal justice, inspired by his desire to help other families find answers when their loved ones disappeared. He chose not to speak at the hearing, but later issued a statement thanking everyone who had never given up looking for his mother. "I want to thank Jerome Washington for his careful attention to detail that led to this discovery," Kevin's statement read. "I want to thank Agent Rodriguez and all the law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly to solve this case. Most of all, I want people to know that my mother was a good person who deserved better than what happened to her. I hope her story will help prevent other families from experiencing what we've gone through." Jerome Washington was honored by both the FBI and the Indiana State Police for his role in solving the case. The discovery had shaken him deeply, knowing that he had been working for years, just floors above where evidence of such a terrible crime had been hidden. He continued working at the factory until his retirement in 2010, but he never forgot the August night when he lifted away that false floor and changed everything. The Rebecca Hartwell case became a textbook example of how physical evidence can survive for years, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring it to light. It also demonstrated the importance of thorough searches in missing person cases and the value of re-examining old evidence with new technology and fresh perspectives. Detective Martinez, who had worked the original case, was brought out of retirement to witness Brennan's sentencing. Now in his 70s, Martinez reflected on the case that had haunted him throughout his career. "Sometimes justice takes time," he said. "Sometimes it takes 14 years and a janitor with a sharp eye. But truth has a way of surfacing, even when people try their best to bury it." The Millfield automotive parts factory was sold again in 2008, and the new owners decided to demolish the building and construct a modern facility on the same site. Before the demolition began, a small memorial service was held for Rebecca Hartwell, attended by her former co-workers, community members, and law enforcement officers who had worked on her case. Agent Rodriguez continued to work cold cases for the FBI, often using the Rebecca Hartwell investigation as an example in training seminars for law enforcement officers. The case demonstrated that persistence, attention to detail, and the willingness to re-examine old evidence could sometimes accomplish what years of traditional investigation could not. For the people of Millfield, the resolution of Rebecca's case brought a complex mix of closure and renewed grief. She had never really left town. She had been there all along, a silent victim of one man's obsession and violence. The community established a memorial scholarship in Rebecca's name, providing financial assistance for single parents pursuing education or job training. The story of Rebecca Hartwell serves as a reminder that behind every missing person case are real people with real dreams, real fears, and real families who love them. In Rebecca's case, it took 14 years. the sharp eyes of a dedicated janitor, and the persistence of law enforcement officers who refused to give up. Justice was delayed, but it was not denied, and a mother and son who had been separated by violence were finally able to rest in peace together. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of women working night shifts in industrial settings, leading to improved security measures at factories across Indiana and beyond. Rebecca's legacy lived on, not just in the memories of those who knew her, but in the safety improvements that would protect other women from experiencing the same fate. Carl Brennan died in prison in 2012, taking with him any remaining secrets about that October night in 1992. But by then, the important truths had already been revealed, and Rebecca Hartwell's story had become part of the larger narrative about persistence, justice, and the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary discoveries that change everything.